My name is Charlie Arrowood. I'm an attorney. I practice in New York State, and I do primarily name change and gender marker work and advocacy around that across the state. I was formerly with an organization called Transcend Legal, and now I'm doing my own thing. And I am here tonight in collaboration with Peloton Pride. And I thought maybe I should do this on my bike, but I'm already very tired, so I'm not going to do it. And also NYU Law School's Identity Documents Project and Trans in the Wild. You'll hear from all of them a little bit later, but basically a roadmap for tonight. We're going to be talking about name and gender marker changes in context, the process for all of it, and kind of the advocacy work that's going on, then a little bit about the NYU Identity Documents Project and some other resources, and then I'll be answering questions at the end. If you have questions throughout, feel free to write them in the chat, but I have a ton of information in here, so chances are I will get to most of the frequently asked questions. And then if stuff hasn't been answered towards the end, if you want to put it in the chat, that's fine. So in New York, things are kind of separated into two separate like processes, and everything is kind of in two separate systems. If you're in New York City versus if you're outside New York City. So if you are in New York City, in any of the 5 boroughs, you want to file in Manhattan Civil Court. And if you're outside New York City, you file in the Supreme Court in the county where you live. So this is just kind of the framework of how things go for the whole process. You're going to file the name change and get the name change order in either of those courts. And then you're going to get a doctor's letter, which I will provide you with a template for. And you're going to use that to change the gender marker on your documents. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly. And then you're also, after you have the doctor's letter and the name change order, going to have to actually go and change each individual document that you have. So you want to get a few copies of the name change order because you will need to send it around. You want to get 2 or 3 ink signed copies of your doctor's letter. That's required for all federal document changes and some state document changes. So some state documents, like New York State birth certificates, only use self-attestation, which means you're just signing a sworn statement saying, I am this gender, please change my document. New York City birth certificates, NYC IDs, and New York State birth certificates are done by self-attestation now. All the other state documents, like a driver's license or photo ID through the DMV, that stuff, and federal documents are all done with a doctor's letter. Ask for it early from your doctor so that by the time you get your name change order, you have that doctor's letter and you're ready to go change all your documents. There are different standards, like I just mentioned, for different documents. Some have the doctor's letter, some are self-attestation, some don't require any particular medical treatment. In New York State and at the federal level, it just says appropriate clinical treatment, which I'll get to in a bit. But some states, if your birth certificate is, for example, from one of the southern states, a lot of the southern states either don't let you change your birth certificate at all, or they require some sort of surgical intervention and a doctor's letter that says you've had some sort of surgical intervention. I'll leave it there for now, but your document changes can be done in any order. So it doesn't matter if you have your old birth certificate and you want to go get a new driver's license. As long as you have that court order and your doctor's letter, even if your old birth certificate is all you have, you can change your driver's license and get a driver's license with the right information on it. And that's really great for folks who are younger, who are getting their first driver's license, because even if they can't change their birth certificate for any reason, they're able to still get that first driver's license with the right stuff on it. So the name change requirements in New York State are set out in statute. And it requires certain things that you have to tell the court, and not, if you're impacted by any of those things, it shouldn't change your ability to get a name change in New York. Some states, if you have a criminal record or have certain convictions, or you have some other sort of thing going on in your history, that can sometimes stop you from getting a name change. In New York, that's not the case. The only reason that a name change can be denied in New York is if it's for fraudulent purposes, which for trans people is not the case, and it's a legitimate reason to get a name change, and so they're supposed to grant it. If you run into any of the things that come up, it may just be a matter of providing the court with additional information. I'll go through exactly what the statute requires, but other than that, you shouldn't. Just want to make sure that. Cool. I want to just, one question that came through was that if you're born in a different state, you can't file here. Just to clarify that, your birth certificate, you would change where it was issued, but your name change you would do in the county where you currently live. So the name change process comes first. You get that name change order, and then you go and change each individual document with that name change order. So in addition to the name change statute that sets out what's required, there are additional standards that have come down through case law. So it used to be that courts would require a doctor's letter or some sort of other medical evidence of your trans status in order to issue your name change order. They're not allowed to do that anymore. If you run into a judge that is doing that, it should be appealed and you should contact an attorney. And that's why, especially in the city, no matter what borough you live in, you should be filing in Manhattan, because judges are not going to ask you for that in Manhattan. Staten Island, they tend to ask you for that. Brooklyn, they've been known to ask for that. So you just want to go where they have a name change. They call it a name change part. It's a courtroom that's specifically dedicated to name changes, and the judges shuffle through. And they deal with a lot of trans name changes in Manhattan. So they're not going to ask you for medical evidence. They may give you a hard time on some other stuff, and it's kind of a crapshoot which judge you're going to get. But they shouldn't be asking you for medical stuff, at least. Like I said, there's generally not much discretion for a judge to deny a name change outright. And the name change statute does require publication, but the judge is supposed to waive that based on a totality of the circumstances standard. So basically, you shouldn't have to prove that you have personally been subjected to risk or abuse or harassment or anything based on your trans status. The fact of your trans status under the case law really should be sufficient to tell you, or to get you out of that waiver, or to get you out of that publication requirement. I see a question about Nassau. Nassau, I have done over 100 name changes in Nassau, and I have had 2 with publication get waived. And they were for minors. So judges are pretty stubborn in Nassau. And as you can see below, some judges abuse their discretion. That is from an order from a Nassau judge. As part of the name change petition, you have to tell the judge why you want to change your name. This person said, I'm trans, I want my name to match my identity and appearance, which is the same language that we use for everyone. And it works, and it's supposed to work. There was this one particular judge who is no longer on the bench for a variety of reasons. And she basically said that you just saying that you're trans, bald conclusory statements without any factual support, are insufficient to establish that you're entitled to a name change. There was also a judge, you'll see right next door, it says decline to sign. This was a minor. Both parents were on board, and they requested that the name be changed for the kid. And the judge just said decline to sign. So there was nothing to even appeal from. So we had to file a motion and get that taken care of. And it was ultimately granted. He had no reason for denying the name change or for declining to sign. But back to this one that just says that you can't just say I'm trans, change my name. we went the same day it was denied up to the appellate court, and they immediately reversed that denial because she was not in the right to deny that for no reason. And it is sufficient for you to say, I'm trans. You don't really have to give the court a reason. New York is a common law name change state, and it's sufficient to say, I use that name. That's it. So the fact that we gave the judge anything more than that even meant that she wasn't supposed to have denied it. And so we brought it up to the appellate court. It was overturned the same day. We went back to her and she had to sign it. And this judge did this multiple times. And it got to the point where the higher court was saying, what is her problem? You know, she can't keep denying these name changes. We have to keep chasing appellate judges around to try to get them to sign these orders to reverse her. So, but like I said, she's not on the bench anymore. That being said, there are judges all over the state who do this, and there are judges all over the state who impose additional requirements as a condition of getting the name change. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. If you were born elsewhere, you file where you currently reside, in the county where you currently reside, except for when it comes to your birth certificate. So the name change, the New York State Court website has a do-it-yourself program. There are separate forms for minors and adults. And there are separate forms, like I was saying, for inside New York City and outside New York City. That program is not for more complicated cases. So if you're in a situation with a minor and one parent is happy to petition and the other does not consent, that wouldn't be a situation where you would use the do-it-yourself program. It's also not if there's going to be a risk to your safety, because it does not allow for you to ask for a publication waiver. One of the questions was, just to clarify, are you saying it's not necessary to do the publication in New York? So it is required by the statute that you publish, but you can ask the court for a waiver based on trans status. They sometimes grant it, sometimes do not. It depends where you are. It depends what judge you get. So if you do have a personal history of abuse or harassment or something, or there's a specific threat, you add that to your request, and that really should push them over the edge to grant that waiver. But I've seen it in situations where people have had restraining orders, and the judge has not granted the waiver, and they've still had to publish. We'll talk a little bit more about how to ask for the waiver and what publication really looks like in a little bit. So the other thing to consider is the costs. If you use the DIY program, New York City's program has a way to request a fee waiver, and New York State does not. Like I said, they're in separate courts, and for whatever reason, New York State doesn't allow you to ask for a fee waiver through that system. In New York City, actual costs are about $100 if you're required to publish. So it's $65 to file, and I have this all set out a little bit later. $65 to file, about $35 to publish in the newspaper if you're required to do that, and then certified copies are $6 each. And outside New York City, across the state, it's about $300 in actual costs. So it's $210 to file, $5 a piece for certified orders, and publication can be anywhere from like $45 to, I've seen it up to like $120, but it rarely gets that high. It's usually between 45 and 75. That being said, upstate, we've dealt with situations where judges don't see a lot of name changes, especially for trans people, and they're asking people to publish in the New York Times, which is $300. That is unnecessary, and if a judge does that, that's not what the statute says they should be doing. So push back on it, and if you need to get an attorney involved, just send a letter to the court to say, like, this is unnecessary. There are other newspapers that are circulated here that would fulfill the statutory requirement. If you use the court's website program, you need to use Windows. You can't use a Mac. And if you don't have access to Windows, you can complete it at your court's law library. So most courts where you would file have a law library or a help center, and they have computer terminals, and they're always Windows. They're never Mac. And you can go to the website through one of those computers, print everything out. Oftentimes the clerk's office will have a notary, so you can get everything notarized right there. Sometimes there's a small charge, $2 to $5, but everything gets taken care of right there. I want to just switch over and show you what that website looks like. So can everyone see well, if one of the hosts wants to hop on and let me know if folks can see the name change website right now.
Yeah, Charlie, we see it.
Perfect. Okay, so this is what the court website looks like. If you Google NY DIY name change, this is one of the first things that comes up. And as you can see, it separates it out for New York State residents, adult name change petition, or child name change petition. And that's the DIY program, as opposed to each separate document, which you don't want to bother with because it won't produce the whole thing. And then New York City has the same stuff. And down at the bottom, you can see fee waiver. So the statute sets forth all the different things that you need to put in a petition. This is what a petition outside New York City would generally kind of look like. In New York City, they like to have the petitioner's contact information up on top, but the do-it-yourself program will generate it the way that the city will accept it, so don't worry about it. The first thing to consider is if you have changed your name before, or if you have some documents that have misspellings on them, you want to make sure to list those misspellings or variations as AKAs, also known as, in the caption. So where it says Amy Lynn Smith, if, for example, Amy's driver's license said Amy L. Smith, you would do enter, AKA Amy L. Smith. In New York City, they like to see all of those. So it would be Amy Lynn Smith, Amy L. Smith, Amy Smith. Even if there were no misspellings, they like to see all those variations. In other counties, they're not as picky, but you want to make sure that if you have a document that has a typo on it, or has you referred to by a different name, and you're going to have to eventually change that document, you want to make sure that this court order has that spelling on it, because that's what that agency is going to look at and say, this is the person that, you know, is on this document, and this is what their new name should be. So you want to make sure that those identities are always tied together. If you have multiple last names, if you have accents, make sure that you specify which is the first, middle, and last, and make sure it's correct in both the petition and the order that the judge is going to sign, because the order is going to be what agencies use to make those changes. So if it's misspelled on the order, it's kind of a pain in the butt to go back to the court and ask them to amend it. Also be aware that if you have an accent, that doesn't always show up on identity documents. So it will legally be your name, but if you go to get a new driver's license or a passport or something, it generally won't show up. If you have any judgments or liens filed against you. So this is not talking about private credit, like credit card debt, or even things in collection. This is stuff that actually you have a judgment filed against you in court. You will probably know if that's the case. If you don't know, there are ways to search on court websites to see if you're the defendant in any sort of action. But again, like I said before, this shouldn't stop you from getting your name changed. You may just have to provide the court with that information so that when you, and this goes the same for pending legal proceedings, you want to search and make sure you're not the defendant in anything. You'll know if you were the plaintiff in something because you filed it. Um, you just will need to provide the court with the information they need so that you can let the other party know, and the court can order you to let the other party know that that you've had this name change. So if you have a judgment filed against you, you want to provide them with index numbers, the party names, the jurisdiction where that judgment was filed, and then they may order you to notify um, the the person who you owe the money to, or the entity that you owe the money to. If you have a pending legal proceeding, this paragraph you can take word for word and just put in your details. So I am a party to the following action: plaintiff versus defendant, filed whenever, index number, before what judge, what court, and attach the summons and verified complaint as an exhibit on your name change. Then the judge will say, okay, if you are a plaintiff, you want to notify them of the name change because they need to know where to find you. If you're the defendant, I want them to know where to find you so that they can get their money, or you can, um, if you have criminal charges pending, um, then the court is able to find you. If you have a criminal history, some states, like I said, uh, do have specific uh, convictions that bar you from getting a name change. New York is not one of those states. There are some crimes that judges in their discretion can say it's against the public interest and public safety to grant this person a name change, especially like sex offenses against minors and that kind of thing. That being said, it's doable depending on where you are. But anything that is a misdemeanor or a felony, you do need to report, but it shouldn't stop you from getting your name changed. I'm not talking about violations. So if you run a red light camera, or have something you get a ticket for, basically, if it's not a misdemeanor or a felony and it's not a conviction, so if you have something pending or if something was thrown out, that you don't need to report. You do need to report if it's pending, but not under your criminal history. You just want to attach a certificate of disposition. Generally, especially if it's like a case that's like 10 years or older, they're not even going to worry about it. Otherwise, if it's a little more recent, they may ask you to notify the jurisdiction where you were convicted. I did a name change for a trans woman who was incarcerated upstate, and the same judge that wanted her to publish in the New York Times for $300 while she was incarcerated, also wanted her to notify every prosecutor that had convicted her ever, and every district attorney's office that, and like all over the state, everywhere that she had had a run-in with law enforcement, basically, and every judge that had convicted her. And we said, she has been convicted of these things already. She's serving time. This is an additional punishment. They don't have any say in whether she's allowed to have her name changed. That's not part of the punishment for whatever she was convicted for. And eventually, after he had gotten all these letters saying, no, she shouldn't be allowed to have her name changed, eventually we convinced him that that was outside the scope of the statute, and he did not have the discretion to ask for those things and to deny it based on that. So if you run into something like that, push back on it, because they're not supposed to prevent you from changing your name for that. If you have had a bankruptcy in the past, you can find your decision on PACER, which is the federal database that has a bunch of federal court stuff. You can attach a discharge of debt, and if it's super old and the discharge of debt document is not available, you can attach a summary. This is what the discharge order looks like. Family relations. No consent of your spouse is required. So whether you're married, divorced, whatever, that person does not need to consent to this, but child support must be declared, and you need to tell the court if you owe any sort of alimony or anything to your spouse. And again, they may order that you notify your spouse of the name change, but they can't ask for their consent as a condition of getting it. If you're under 18, someone over 18 needs to serve as the petitioner, but it can be someone who's not the parent. It can be the parent or next friend, which is anyone over 18. So if you are 14 and you have an 18-year-old sibling and you know your parents are not on board, you can have that sibling petition on your behalf as next friend to the minor. And the judge, so the statute requires that you notify both parents or whoever the legal parents are, whether it's one parent or two. But all that's required is notification. So you don't actually need consent from them. And the standard is that the interests of the infant will be substantially promoted by the change, which for a trans child, at this point, it's pretty well established that that is satisfied. So even if you have a parent that's not consenting, the court may want to set up a hearing for the parent to come in and be heard, but they can stomp their feet. And it's, I don't want to say it's pretty easy to show that the standard is met, but it's very clear that taking care of a name change as early as possible for a child who is trans is in the child's best interest. If the child is 14 and up, they need to submit consent signed in front of a notary by themselves. So if a child is under 14, then they don't need to submit consent. If they're over 14, then they do. For immigration, everyone, whether documented or not, has access to the courts, but because the judge may require notification to DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, USCIS, so Customs and Immigration, and they're allowed to do that, you want to consider whether you want to risk that. Make sure that your immigration status is current if possible. If you're seeking asylum based on your trans status, proof of a name change may be helpful. And we've worked with folks before who they wanted to publish in the newspaper because then they were able to put that into their asylum petition and say, this is now public, it's dangerous for me to go home, grant my asylum petition. If you have concerns about immigration, consult your immigration attorney before filing, or an organization that does this pro bono, because it can get dicey. The courts and USCIS have sworn to us that when these petitions are sent over there, they go into an administrative file and not an enforcement file. But nobody wants their stuff on file with USCIS. So it used to be the case in Nassau that everyone, no matter where you were born, needed to notify Homeland Security before they filed even. And then after they filed, and then after they got their order signed. And we explained to them that that made no sense. But I was born at Lenox Hill in Manhattan, and I now have a file with USCIS because they wanted my county court wanted a copy of my name change order sent to them. So yeah, the bottom line there is that technically you should have access to the courts, but you want to be careful about how you do that and speak to an immigration attorney who's aware of the implications of notifying Homeland Security. So publication is a legal notice. It's a tiny little classified ad that goes in the newspaper. The language that you need to put in there is in the order that will be signed, and the judge will tell you where to publish. In New York City, ask the judge for the Irish Echo. It's the cheapest, and everyone makes jokes that name change publications are the only thing that keep the Irish Echo running. They're quick to publish. You can run and pick up your affidavit of publication, which you see on the screen there. That's what it looks like usually, something like that. And outside of New York City, there are specific newspapers that are designated in the county or in the town, and the judge will give you contact information for that newspaper. You call them or email them, and you say, I need to publish a name change order, and you give them the language that you need. published, and they'll mail you this affidavit of publication a few days later. Um, I do have a fairly comprehensive list of um, the the newspapers that they have you publish in, the costs, the contact information for everyone. So if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out about them. Um, the language or the information that is in this little notice, it's your old name, new name, date of birth, place of birth, and address. I have gotten away with just putting the city and state and not the full address. Obviously, there are safety implications for trans people to have all of this information out there. That being said, when I changed my own name well before I started doing this, I didn't realize that I could ask for a publication waiver. Not that I would have gotten it in Nassau anyway, but I realized after I had filed that I could ask for it, and I called the law help center in my court, and I said, can I file an affidavit requesting a publication waiver? So basically just kind of a supplement. And he said, you can start over and pay another $210, or you can acknowledge that no one is reading the local newspaper. And I said, okay. And I didn't have an extra 210 bucks. So I just published and it was fine. And now I have this cute little newspaper clipping with my name in it. But if you feel strongly about it, then ask for the waiver and fight it if you don't get it. A lot of people don't really feel super strongly. They would like it to be waived, but whatever. And then they get the name change granted and they're told that they have to publish and they say, forget it, I just want my name changed on. So they end up just dealing with it and publishing. So basically, this is just where in the statute there is publication waiver. The publication waiver is allowed. The waiver of publication and sealing of records are tied together. So if your publication is waived, then your record automatically gets sealed, and it makes it more difficult to get copies later. It means that if someone walks down to the clerk's office and knows your old name or your new name, and they ask for your file, the clerk's office basically says, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no file by that name. It just means also, though, that if you need to go get more copies later, it can be a little bit more difficult. You might need to get it unsealed, which can be a pain. But that's why we say if you do have publication waived, get 7 to 10 copies of your order so you don't have to go back to the court later. If you do publish and the record will be open, get 5 copies, because you can always run back to the clerk's office and pick up more copies. Like I said before, trans status is supposed to satisfy the standard for the publication waiver, and courts can't deny the request for a publication waiver just because there hasn't been an individualized or specific threat or history of risk. So they can't say, well, you've never personally been victimized because of your gender, so I'm going to, require you to publish. But they also, there is a publication requirement in the statute, and judges have a lot of discretion to do what they want. So they may very well just require you to publish. If you would like to request a publication waiver, I have a big paragraph of specific language with case law and standards and stuff that I can send over to you. And you can also add personal details. So if you're in a situation where you actually have had some sort of personal situation that you are uncomfortable publishing because of, you can add that into the language that I send you. So as I mentioned, filing $65 to purchase an index number in New York City at the Civil Court in Manhattan. It's 111 Center Street downtown. Outside New York City, it's $210, and you're going to file in the Supreme Court. There's something called an RJI, a request for judicial intervention. Usually when you file a court case, you need to pay for that separately, but for name changes, you do not need to pay for that. So if you're downstate, a clerk's office is not going to charge you for this. But if you're upstate and they don't do a ton of name changes and they try to charge you for this, it's like $95, push back on it because it's in the statute that you should not be charged for it. If you can't afford to pay the actual costs, You can request to proceed as a poor person. That is not the greatest language, but that's what they call it. Um, you just need to show the court proof of income or lack thereof. So if you receive benefits, Social Security, Medicaid, if you are in college and unemployed and you're not getting support from your parents or anything, you can show the court a school registration or a statement. Um, if you add language into the order, which you can't do in New York City because in New York City, they generate the order in the courtroom. But outside New York City, when you do the DIY form, you put the order together basically with the information that you've put into the system. So you can add in there language asking for 5 free certified copies. And if the clerk's office pushes back when you go to pick up your certified copies, you can just say, no, the judge signed the order and it says that I get 5 free certified copies because I got a fee waiver. And they've done it for me every time I've tried to do it. Might have a hard time upstate a little bit, but down here it works. The only thing about that is that you still need to pay the publication fee if you're ordered to publish because that's a private entity. It's a newspaper. So even though you don't have to pay the filing fee and the certified copy fee, you will still need to pay for that publication fee. And I've had situations where folks got the fee waiver and didn't have to pay for all the filing and everything, but they did need to pay to publish and they couldn't raise the money in time. And so they had to go back and ask for an extension on that. Those are fairly common, especially if it's based on financial need. So there are ways to ask for that if you do run into that situation. So actually filing. In New York City, you want to file at 111 Center Street. You purchase an index number at the clerk's office and they'll schedule a hearing date. Hearing days and times are limited and it can take up to 4 to 6 weeks for you to actually get on the calendar. They used to do them every day, but now they have cut it back to 2 or 3 days a week. And the actual hearing procedure depends on the judge and their staff. So you could have a judge who just looks at everything and signs off on it. You could have a judge that calls you up to the bench and asks you a couple of questions. Usually they're not super invasive questions. It's just like, we've seen like, so you're having a name, you want to get your name changed. Do you know if we're able to purchase index numbers remotely due to COVID? So right now, courts are only hearing emergency matters and you're not able to, most of the clerk's offices are pretty much closed. They are not taking non-emergency filings. They're expanding that a little bit this week, actually today, but this doesn't fall under any of the types of filings that they are open to taking right now. So folks are not going to be able to actually file name changes until the courts reopen a little bit more. But there, in a lot of counties, you can e-file. So it may be something that's easier to do before the court completely opens up. That being said, in New York City, it's in person, so you can't e-file. And some other counties, Suffolk County out on Long Island is not e-file. So it depends on the county where you are, and it depends on whether the clerk's office is open. Right now, the state court system is determining that. So it's not a local decision. And it's not, I have someone who's in the middle of a name change and I can't even file their proof of publication because the clerk's office is closed and that's an e-file case. So the e-file system won't even accept that mid-case filing. So outside New York City, you purchase an index number at the clerk's office at your county Supreme Court, and some clerk's offices will take everything from you and get it over to the courthouse or to the person who's going to assign a judge to it. Some will ask you to deliver it to the courthouse. It's oftentimes going to be that you're going to bring it to the special term office. Many counties don't require a hearing or appearance. Some do. So sometimes they'll take it from you and then they'll just mail you a signed order a couple weeks later. Others, you will go directly up to the judge's, the courtroom that day. They'll sign it, and you bring it back to the clerk's office. Getting distracted by the chat. So I'm gonna answer the chat questions at the end. So yeah, depending on where you are, that will dictate kind of how the local rules work, and your local the law help center or court information center will let you know kind of what the procedure is there. And if you use the DIY program, it does print out instructions for the specific jurisdiction where you are. I have really detailed instructions for Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island. I'm talking like, when you walk into this office, sign in on the form or they'll be mean to you. And then they'll ask you what you want. Like, so if you're in Nassau or Suffolk and you want those instructions, I'm happy to get those over to you. They're a little more detailed than the ones that the court website prints out, but otherwise, the court website does tell you where to go and what order to do things in and that kind of thing. Everywhere, no matter whether you're in New York City or any other county across the state, you want to bring your original or certified copy of your birth certificate. If you don't have one, you can order one from vitalcheck.com without the C in check, so CHEK. Takes a couple of weeks to get, and a photo ID, an original photo ID. Some counties want to see the photo ID, others don't care. You want to bring any other original documents that you've referenced in your petition. So if you have a divorce decree, or if you have a child support order or something like that, or if you needed to present the passport for some reason, you want to bring all the original documentation with you when you file, so that the clerk can see it, photocopy it, and then give it back to you, or they'll keep it with the file and then give it back to you when you get your actual order. When they mail it to you, they'll mail your originals back. But your local court will be able to give you super detailed instructions on that. I will say that they're not allowed to give you legal advice. So they are not going to tell you, if you have, like I was saying before, the immigration issue, and you walk in and say, I'm undocumented, is it risky for me to file this? They're not allowed to answer that question, because that counts as legal advice. But they can, they can ask you, or if you ask them, I don't know, how do I fill out the index number on all of these forms? Or, do I need to staple this or paperclip it? Or, something that's administrative, they will be able to tell you how to deal with that. So after you get the signed order, there are a few things that have to happen before it is considered final. Publication, the judge will tell you if you need to publish, where to publish, and how to contact them. In New York City, if you want to ask for the Irish Echo, you need to specifically ask for it in most cases. Once you have your publication affidavit, that little clipping, you return that to the clerk's office, and then you can pick up certified copies at the same time. If you have any other notifications that are required, like you need to notify immigration, you need to notify a creditor, anything like that, you do that by certified mail. So you use this little green certified mail receipt that you can get at the post office, and they'll stamp it at the post office when they mail your document, and you just bring that back to the clerk's office as proof that you've actually sent that document to that party. And so you want to make sure, if you're required to do any of that, that you just bring everything at the same time, and then you can immediately get your certified copies. And the certified copies are what you will use to actually change stuff. Like I said, New York City, they're $6 each, and they come with a little receipt attached. So you want to keep that attached. Do not pull it apart. Outside of New York City, they're usually $5 a piece. 5 copies if the record is unsealed, 7 to 10 if it will be sealed, and don't remove the staples or the receipts. So once you have your certified copies, that's when you actually go and change your documents. All New York State and New York City documents and federal documents are changed administratively. So some states require a court order. You get certified copies at the clerk's office when you bring back the proof that you've published and all that stuff. Sometimes it'll be in a different room that you pick them up, but they'll tell you where to go. So some states require a court order to change a birth certificate, for example. In New York, that's not how that works. You contact the Department of Health directly, and they have forms, which I'll give you links to. I have instructions on my website, and they hyperlink to those forms. Your passport is done administratively. Social Security is done administratively, the DMV. So these are things that you're going directly into the office, the Social Security office, the DMV, the passport office, or a post office to update these things. You're not doing that through court, but you are using the court order that you got through the court system. As I was mentioning before, the doctor's letter needs to say that you've had appropriate clinical treatment. That doesn't mean anything in particular. That can mean you came out to your doctor. That can mean you've undergone hormone therapy, surgery of any sort. If the doctor is comfortable saying that you've undergone this treatment, then that's all you need. It has to be from an MD or DO, not necessarily a transition-related provider. You can get one from your podiatrist, as long as they are an MD and they're comfortable saying, yep, this person is trans and they've undergone treatment. You need to get 2 to 3 original ink signed copies so that if you have to send it out for your passport change or something else, you're able to still change your other documents and have a copy on hand. Make sure it's not a photocopy. It needs to be ink signed, preferably in blue ink, so that they can't say this is a photocopy. A lot of times, especially with passports now and Social Security, you go into the office or you mail out your stuff and they say it's denied because this is a photocopy. And you're like, no, I watched the guy sign it. Like, it's not a photocopy. And there's nothing you can do about it besides start over. And for the passport, they don't refund you if that happens. And it's a real pain. So do what you can to have your stuff in order before you send it out so that that doesn't happen. Doing this in any order is fine as long as you have the name change order in the doctor's letter. So I generally recommend, if it's possible, to just take the day off work and go to the DMV, go to the post office to deal with your passport, go to Social Security, and in one day, then you've taken care of everything. The birth certificate gets mailed out, and some of the other stuff, like if you need to change information with your bank, you go into the branch. If you need to change your credit card stuff, you can either go into a branch if it's a bank card, or call them and figure out if you need to email or fax stuff. Car insurance, health insurance. There's a ton of different stuff that you'll need to change, and you'll keep running into stuff as time goes on. I changed my name 3 years ago and I still get stuff to my old name, and I just deal with it as it comes in. There's no monolithic database that says, you know, this person has changed their name. Nobody knows you changed your name just because you got that order. You need to actually tell people. So, you know, I've updated my name on pretty much everything except my passport, but my gender marker is all over the place. I have an F on some stuff, an M on some stuff, an X on some stuff, and I haven't run into any problems yet. And I don't know a ton of people who have from that being the case, but nobody knows what nobody communicates, really. So nobody knows what the other agencies and documents say. Some people don't even change their birth certificate. There's sometimes something about the birth certificate that feels the most official. And I know, like, when I changed mine, that was the thing that my mom was most upset about, because she felt like that was like the document that brought me to life, and I was changing it. So ex-gender markers, they are available on New York City birth certificates and on the NYC ID. They are not available on New York State birth certificates or the DMV documents or federal documents. So Social Security, Medicare, passport, anything issued by the federal government, or anything issued by New York State. If you have a New York City birth certificate, so you were born within the 5 boroughs, and you have an X on that, or if you want to get an X on that, that's fine, but you're not going to be able to get it on your driver's license. We're working on a fix to that, which I'll talk about shortly, but basically that's one of those situations where your documents are going to be a little bit all over the place, and you just have to weigh kind of what you want. Do you want to wait to update it until it's available? Do you want to have mismatched documents? Whatever it is. Birth certificates. The change, and this is, someone asked about this earlier, the change for your birth certificate is requested from the place where you were born, regardless of where you currently live. They issued that document, only they have the jurisdiction to change it. And requirements differ by jurisdiction. So some states require a letter, a doctor's letter. Some say appropriate clinical treatment. Some say proof of surgery. In New Jersey, where they no longer require proof of surgery, that was interpreted differently depending on what office you sent your stuff to. So some were requiring genital surgery. Some were requiring top surgery. And some folks were getting away with a hormone implant counting as surgery because the doctor was saying, yeah, it's outpatient surgery. And they were saying, yep, I did a surgical procedure on this person. And so that is a little bit all over the place depending on where your birth certificate was issued. The National Center for Transgender Equality has a great ID documents resource center, and they break it down by, name change requirements in every state, birth certificate change requirements, driver's license change requirements. So that's worth checking out if you have a birth certificate that was not issued in New York City or New York State. Other places require a court order saying this person has changed their gender, or this is this person's gender, or hey, Department of Health, change this person's document. Because New York State does stuff administratively, New York judges will not issue those orders. So if you were born in Utah or Indiana, those are 2 places that require a court order to change a birth certificate, you really have to just use the court system in those places to get that order. We're working on a bill. How far are we? Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So in a couple slides, I'll get there. Some jurisdictions don't allow birth certificates at all, birth certificate changes at all. Tennessee, Idaho just got sued. Puerto Rico just was ordered to change the way that they do this. Ohio, they're losing. And so ultimately they will be required to allow for these changes. But if you are from one of those states, my recommendation is to try to get your passport changed, because you can usually use that instead of a birth certificate as proof of identity. So New York State and New York City issue separate birth certificates, but right now both accept a notarized affidavit from the applicant. So it used to be that New York State required you to have a notarized doctor's letter, which was the only circumstance in which a doctor's signature had to be notarized in New York State. And they got sued by Lambda Legal, and they now have changed that policy. So if you are 17 and above, you can submit your own self-attestation and application. And if you are under 17, a parent can do it on your behalf. Still no X's though. New York City, you can get an X. Other documents, like I was saying, driver's license, non-driver ID, Social Security. If you were assigned male at birth, you need to register for the draft when you turn 18. Even if you've changed your gender marker with Social Security, if you were assigned male at birth, you still need to register. If you were assigned female at birth and you change your sex with them to male, you need to either register for the draft if you're between the ages of 18 and 25, or you can get a status information letter which excuses you from the draft. So when you put in the request for the status information letter, you do explain that you're asking for it because you're trans, but the letter itself just says you're excused. And this is important because when you go to apply for federal student loans, or if you need government clearance for anything, if you want to apply to a state school, some private schools even, they want proof that you are either registered for the draft or you don't need to be registered. And so having that letter means that you can prove to them that you don't need to be registered. That being said, it's an extra piece of documentation that you need to submit. So sometimes it's just easier to register for the draft. Again, it's a personal decision, and it really is a question of, is there a risk of being drafted if there is a draft instituted? Is there a chance that you would be excused anyway, which right now I am pretty certain that you would be. So really that's something to think about if you're between the ages of 18 and 25. I have instructions on my website that talk about exactly what I just said and lay it out. So it's worth taking a look at those if you have questions about that. But it's just something to be aware of. Passport, school documents, immigration documents, bank, mortgage, deed stuff, insurance, health and car, title for your car. So a lot of stuff that, a lot of the procedures in New York for changing documents and changing your name and all that don't make sense on the ground. So there are requirements that really, like the issue with people who were born out of state and need a court order, and judges won't issue that. Like, those people are New York residents and they need access to the courts and they need to get relief from the courts. So we're working on a bill, the Gender Recognition Act at the state level, that codifies the ability for minors to change their New York State birth certificates, because until that settlement that I just spoke about, you were not allowed to change your birth certificate if you were under 18 and you had a New York State birth certificate. So we were running into kids who were going off to college and needed to register with their schools without the right birth certificate. And that meant that they had to out themselves. They had to room in the wrong place. It was a safety issue. All of the other documents that they were using their birth certificate to get were wrong. And so just making sure that it's not just a policy at the administrative level, but that it's the law in New York that minors can do this is part of this bill. It also allows for courts to issue gender marker change orders. It allows trans parents to change their name and parental designation on their child's birth certificate. So in New York City, you can do this. If you have a kid prior to your name change and their birth certificate is wrong now, you can send in your order and they will amend that birth certificate. If you have a New York State birth certificate for your child, they will not do that. They want you to go to the court and get a separate order on top of your name change order. So that's an extra, like $300, $400 and time and discriminatory, it's a discriminatory requirement. So this bill would specifically tell the Department of Health that they need to allow for parents to make this change and to change from mother to father, or mother or father to parent, because right now they're saying that they can't let you say parent on a birth certificate, when really, if you've adopted a child, the birth certificate they print out says parent on it. It doesn't say mother or father sometimes. So they have the ability to do it. They're just refusing to. That's a fight that I'm personally having with them, and I am happy to talk about it with anyone who runs into this issue. It also makes self-attestation the standard for all New York State documents. So birth certificate and driver's license, photo ID, gets rid of the doctor's letter requirement entirely, and it establishes the X gender marker for all New York State issued documents. So it's not just for New York City. And right now this has been introduced in both houses in the legislature up in Albany, but because of the budget and the coronavirus situation, we were expecting it to be passed this year, and now because they are not in session really anymore doing anything besides coronavirus stuff, we're thinking it might end up being next year, which is a bummer, but we're also working on administrative advocacy and all this stuff. So hopefully we have remedies for some of it. So I'm going to go over now to Madison to talk about the NYU ID Documents project, if you want.
Hi, yes, my name is Madison, I use she, her, and I'm a student currently at NYU Law. The NYU Identity Documents Project started in 2016. We pair law students with people who are seeking name changes or any kind of identity document updates, just to help them work through the process, figure out, deal with some of these administrative and bureaucratic hurdles that can be kind of hard to do on your own if you've never dealt with them before. And we also have some funding to help people pay for things if they can't afford them. Obviously, we have slowed down a little bit while all this coronavirus stuff has been going on, and we haven't been able to meet with people in person, and the courts have been closed, but hopefully when everything starts to open back up again, we can really take off.
Okay, hang on. Got to get my screen share back. So yeah, that's pretty much the spiel. These are a bunch of resources that are primarily document and name change related, nonprofits, private attorney, and a lot of them have programs where they either match you with a pro bono attorney or can give you advice about how to walk you through it. Milo Primo is up in Rochester, and he does sliding scale name changes across the state except for downstate. And he is awesome and super knowledgeable. He also does health insurance work and some discrimination work. Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, Legal Assistance of Western New York, Empire Justice Center. Those are all nonprofits that, depending on your location, can hook you up with a local attorney if you need help. Pride for Youth does pro bono name change work. I have a position there as well in a non-legal capacity, and so I can help you walk through stuff there, and they have folks who can help you put the paperwork together, and they are located on Long Island. That is it. And I also just want to show you, hang on, what my website looks like. So that you can see the kind of the instructions and stuff that I've got up there. So on my website, I have a bunch of resources, general name change, post name change instructions for adults and minors. So that walks you through all the different places that you need to change your name and how to do it kind of, and hyperlinks to how to find the offices you need and the forms you need. I've got sample doctor's letter for federal documents and for the DMV. And that tells you what you need to have there. Passport correction, birth certificate correction stuff, and then the selective service instructions and information is all there as well. So now I will stop sharing and we'll hit the chat. I know I answered some questions as we were going, but I'm going to look through and see what we missed. So I hit this before, but if you were born in a different state, you file your name change here in the county where you live, and you ask for your birth certificate from the jurisdiction where that was issued. If you have trouble figuring that out, you can reach out to me and I can get you pointed in the right direction. A gender marker change, you're not really filing that with the court anywhere. You're just having that doctor's letter or that affidavit, and you're sending it out directly with the request to change, to get the new document. Nassau County, they don't do publication waivers. I think we've routed out some of the bad apples, and so they're pretty fine and they just sign stuff, but they still don't issue the publication waivers. If you were born in Queens, but you live on Long Island now, you file where you live now. If a person is cis or doesn't want to change their gender marker, would it be harder for them to convince the judge for their name change? It should not be, because this is a common law name change state. And when I say that, I mean, you don't really need a legal name change order to use whatever name you're going to use. So feel free to go by whatever name you go by, whether you have the court order or not. It's just that you need the court order to change the actual documents and change the official stuff. Like I was nervous before I legally changed my name, and I felt like I was going to get in trouble if I went by a different name. So I didn't do it until I had my legal name change. But you can use whatever name you want to use. But if you're cis, you just would have a different reason in your petition for why you're changing your name. And even if you're trans and you don't feel comfortable having that in the record, you can just say, I go by this name, this is what people call me, and I want my official documents to match. So that would be a perfectly reasonable reason for a cis person or a trans person to get their name changed. If you're able to change your name through naturalization, would you recommend, or would you do it after the naturalization process? I would absolutely recommend it, because that means that you don't have to change your documents after the fact. It is very, very expensive to replace immigration documents, more so than most other documents. And so if you are able to do it, you are able to change it through the naturalization process, and your immigration attorney can help you do that. I definitely think it's a great idea. That being said, as I mentioned before, if you need the publication stuff, or that court order to kind of bolster your asylum case or something, that's a calculation that you can discuss with your immigration attorney. Rockland County is considered, I wouldn't say it's considered like super upstate. It's definitely not New York City or Nassau or Suffolk. I haven't run into any issues in Rockland County. They're pretty straightforward. They sign stuff. Same with Albany County. They sign stuff. It's not really an issue. I'm talking like middle of nowhere, Western New York, like dead zone is where they hassle us. Get certified copies at the clerk's office. So how to get this certified copy, the certified name approved copies you need at that time. I assume after approved, they mail you. So they mail you a preliminary copy that's just the signed order, but then you have to do the things that the order says within the designated period of time, which is like you have to publish within 30 days of the date of the order, and you have to show them proof of publication within 60 or 90 days. So you bring that back to the clerk within 60 or 90 days. So when you first get that order, it's not really official yet. You can't do anything with the uncertified order. And you have to wait, you have to do all the things that the order says in order to get the like full certified order. And it's after you actually do all those things that you can pick up the certified copies, and that's what you use to go to the DMV and the passport and everything. If you were born in Virginia, you would file for your name change in New York State if you live in New York State. The only thing that you would be filing for in Virginia would be your birth certificate change. So I think they actually just changed their law there. I'm not totally sure when it goes into effect to allow for X gender markers, I think. But I can check out the National Center for Trans Equality ID Document Center for Virginia specifically, or I can get you information on that too if you reach out. You don't physically need to go to the court in Virginia. I think it's generally it's done by mail. If it's not a state that requires a court order to change it, then it's all usually done by mail. Connecticut requires a special kind of paper to change your birth certificate. So they mail it to you and then you fill it out and mail it back to them. But other than that, like a lot of places for that stuff, it's mostly administrative. To change the gender marker on your birth certificate, would you only need the doctor's letter? It depends on where your birth certificate was issued. So if it was issued by New York State, you would just need the affidavit signed by you. If it was issued by New York City, same thing. If it was issued by a place that requires a doctor's letter, then you would need the doctor's letter. And in a lot of places, you can use the same letter that you would use for the federal stuff. And that's on my website. Free legal advice in Arizona with insurance to get top surgery covered. Yeah, so I have to look. I don't know if there are any specific organizations working on stuff there, but I can definitely connect you with resources that can point you in the right direction. Email me about that specifically. My email is at the end of the PowerPoint, and I will connect you with someone. Changing your gender mark on your birth certificate. Check Virginia. Trying to get their birth certificate changed in a southern state. So it will depend on what state you're trying to get it changed in. Check the Trans Equality, the National Center for Transgender Equality's ID Document Center for details on your specific state. And in some cases, it's more complicated than others. Other times, it seems like it's going to be really terrible and scary, and it just sails through because you happen to get a decent clerk. So it just depends on kind of the specifics of that state. Texas can be tough, unsurprisingly. I think there's a surgical requirement in Texas. I'm not positive, but you can definitely get that information from NCTE's website. States that mandate that you're present to change your birth certificate or to get a name change. I don't know totally what that question, to get the court order. So to get the gender marker court order in order to change your birth certificate. Okay, so most places, I think if you have an attorney representing you in that jurisdiction and the attorney says, listen, this person lives across the country, they're not coming all the way here for this court order, they hired me to take care of this, here's all their signed stuff, it's been notarized, you should be able to, through your attorney, get that taken care of. But the fees are a little bit different depending on where you're filing, and the attorney fees are a lot. So it will depend on where you're seeking that. But you can reach out to me with specifics if you're not able to find what you need. Thank you to Katie for posting the NCTE website. Could you try and prepare for an adult legal name change a couple of months before you turn 18? I would love to have it. Okay, yes. So you can get all your documents squared away, but don't sign it until your 18th birthday. So because you are in the caption saying I'm the petitioner and you're saying this is my birthday, I am 18 years old, this is where I live, everything is going to have to be current immediately when you file. So if you are going to be moving somewhere else, or if you are going to have a different driver's license because your driver's license expires or whatever it is. Don't sign anything until you actually turn 18, but you can make sure you have your birth certificate, make sure you have whatever documentation you need. You can draft the petition and just not date and sign it until your actual birthday, and that's when you go file. But you can definitely get the ball rolling. How long is the process? That's a really good question. It depends on where you are. So in New York City, like I said, you file, and then they give you a hearing date about 4 to 6 weeks out. And so the whole thing, if you are ordered to publish, it'll take like maybe 2 months. Same thing for a county like Nassau, where you bring everything in and they mail it back to you, and then they assign it to a judge, and like it just kind of goes back and forth. Most counties are like that, where you just kind of, it goes by mail kind of slowly, and that takes about 6 to 8 weeks. But in Suffolk County specifically, you go in and they send you up to a judge that day, and the judge signs it, and you're down sometimes within 15 minutes, and it's done. And in Suffolk, they actually, if you say you're trans in your petition, they waive publication even if you don't ask a lot of times. So you really are done, and you just have to send the certified copy request out to the clerk's office in Riverhead. If you are ordered to publish, it's a little bit more cumbersome, and you have to get the publication taken care of, and you can mail it out to Riverhead with your request for certified copies. But Suffolk is the fastest one I know. Some other jurisdictions upstate may do it that way, but I'm not familiar with any that do. I think mostly it's that you either mail stuff in or bring it in person, and then they assign it to a judge. The judge signs it, sends it back to you with the requirements of publication and all that, and then you mail all the proofs back or bring them back in person. So it's a little bit longer and more stretched out, but it's usually not more than like 2 months if it's a straightforward case. If it's more complicated, it can drag out a little bit more. You also want to make sure that you give the judge everything that they will ask for in the first place, so that they're not setting an unnecessary hearing date or asking you for other stuff that's going to prolong it. Mount Vernon, I think it's kind of that like 6 to 8 week area. For Nebraska, just has a birth certificate, gender marker info. I do think Nebraska might have an administrative name change process. I know Oregon does, because NCTE was working on that. Nebraska might, so you might not even need a court order, but I'm not totally certain. It's something to look into. If they don't have it there, there are a couple other websites that I can point you to if you reach out. The answer to where you get certified copies, you can have them mailed to you. You don't always have to pick them up in person, but it takes a much longer time. So sometimes it's just easier to run over there and pick them up at the clerk's office. So usually it's the same place you purchased your index number. It might be a different room or a different window, but it's generally the clerk's office. And a lot of times when you get your signed order, it'll come with instructions for the county that you're in. And they'll say, make sure you get your publication taken care of within the time limit. Make sure that you, bring everything back to the clerk, or, this is where you bring everything. Because name changes usually are done by folks on their own. So the court knows that they have to really spell things out, because it's not usually attorneys. What are the options for gender marker on NYC DMV issued documents? So a driver's license is issued by New York State, even if you live in New York City. So you cannot get an X on a driver's license that was issued by New York State. There's the NYC ID, which is good to like get you into museums and stuff, but that's not a driver's license, and that's only issued by New York City, and that's what you can get an X on. But a state driver's license you can't. An old diploma and professional licenses, you can get those names changed. Usually they just want to see a copy of the court order. Contact the registrar at your former institution and ask them what they would like to see. If you have a professional license in something, that's going to be the State Department of Education usually. So there's a name change form that they have on that website, and that they'll tell you what they want. It's usually just the name change order. I don't know the rules in Virginia about minors filing for stuff. I know that New York was, I think, the only jurisdiction that differentiated between adults and minors for the birth certificate. Um, Westchester County, super simple to get a name change. You just use the do-it-yourself program, and they explain to you where to file. And the gender marker change, like I said, is just dependent on the document. If you were born in New York City, you can get an X. Otherwise, it's all just M or F. And then like almost 15 states at this point are doing X's on birth certificates, and over 20 are doing X's on driver's licenses. Dutchess County also same, pretty straightforward. You just use the DIY program. Everything basically outside of New York City is the same process, and anything in the Hudson Valley and kind of like on the eastern side of the state is pretty decent. I haven't run into a ton of problems. It's as you go west and really like get into Western New York that you may run into some other issues. Yeah, this is going to be recorded too, so we can send that out to folks. And I'm going to be emailing the PowerPoint as well. You can change your last name, you can change your middle name, you can change your first name, you can get rid of a middle name, whatever you want to do. And it can be whatever you want it to be. You can make it up from whole cloth. It does not have to be a maiden name or a married name or a parent's name or anything like that. You can just say, I want to go by whatever. And they, unless it's like a slur or a curse word or something that's like not in the public interest or obviously for fraudulent reasons, the judge really can't tell you you can't go by this name. So if that's all the questions, then we can wrap things up. So this is my contact information. I am located in Nassau County, but I do this across the state. And I can connect you to more local folks if you would prefer to interface with someone in person locally. Just to touch back on NYU, if you have a more complicated case or you're not able to take care of this on your own for whatever reason, you can connect with Madison, and she can hook you up with someone from NYU Law School who can walk you through the process and get everything put together for you. And that's that. Cool. Thanks so much. Thanks to Peloton Pride and Trans in the Wild and NYU Law School. Feel free to reach out, and I hope everyone enjoyed and got something out of this.